Welcome to part 3. A few things to note before we jump into it. The lore section is going to switch places with the voice line section, and the alternate styles of the Arcanas are going to also be discussed in the visual design section. Intro, take it away. Okay, gonna go over the criteria again, just in case there are folks watching these vids out of order. So, these Arcanas are gonna be ranked by visual design, lore, spell effects, voice lines, and animation. I average these aspects out and give the Arcana an all-around score. But before we spin the wheel, I got some catching up to do with the second styles, so let's get into a lightning round. The Dro second style is neat. It implies that she not only gave into the madness, but has found a way to control it. The second Spectre style is, It doesn't seem to be a progression of the Arcana story, like Drow's is. While it is a nice color, I don't think this color fits Spectre's aesthetic very well. Second Faceless Void style. It's something. The style is called Clausian Supremacy, so I assume that Claus won and took over Void, and this is the result? Not too sure. I prefer the base style anyways. Juggernaut. Not very good at all. Still a mishmash of particle effects, and it's just so boring. Queen of Pain removes what makes the original interesting by not changing the eye color to red or another contrasting color. The little bit of red on the cape is nice though. Whew. Okay, looks like we're all caught up. With that out of the way, let's see what the wheels got in store for us. Ah, Spooky Trevor.
Terror Blade? This is why you shouldn't give yourself a nickname. They need to be organic. Spooky Trevor. That's better.
This Arcana actually succeeds in making Terrorblade an actually fearsome character. His default design humanizes him too much, to the point where it's almost hard to be scared of him, I think. It's the fact that he has a face, like a human. You can reason with this thing. It evidently has a thinking mind, so maybe he's not all that threatening. But remove the face, and suddenly there's a problem. It conveys an unfeeling, unthinking version of Terrorblade. This thing will kill without remorse. The lack of a face removes all humanity Terrorblade once had, making him much more threatening. The fact that red fire is burning up from the cavity in his face and chest spell out something even more dire. What's on his heart? Destruction. What's on his mind? The same thing. He becomes a single-minded entity, bent on completing whatever vile task he wishes to, however he wants to do it, and nobody is going to talk him out of it. I appreciate how it touches up his horns as well, and honestly, I would really appreciate it if this was just a remodel. It communicates Terrorblade's identity so much better than his default design. Now, looking at this, you might notice that it clashes a lot with Terrorblade's existing skins. But that's where the prismatic gems come in. You have 41 color choices to choose from, even though these things are pretty much impossible to get nowadays. With that aside, it's not too different from default, but it's a direct upgrade from Terrorblade's default design. 7 out of 10. The lore of this Arcana is the exact same as Terrorblade's original lore. There's no difference. He went to a demon prison, self-reflected, and decided to be even worse than he originally was. 0 out of 10. While the ability icons are very enjoyable, this Arcana only affects 2 spells, Metamorphosis and Sunder. They both turn the spells the prismatic gem color and nothing more. 2 out of 10. The voice filter this Arcana has is barely different from default.
Stolen fruit is ever sweetest. Stolen fruit is ever sweetest.
A disappointing 1 out of 10. The only new animations this Arcana has is a barely different Sunder and this spinny blade thing he does when he's idle for a bit. I'm not impressed. For its time, this Arcana was revolutionary with the whole prismatic gem shtick, but outside of its visual design, it's got a lot lacking. I wish I had more to say about its other aspects, but there's not much to say anything about. This one gets a 2.5 out of 10 from me. Okay, with Spooky Trevor out of the way, let's give the wheel a good old spin and see what we get. Vengeful Spirit. This one's going to be very interesting to talk about, especially because I feel like it's easier to talk about both bird people arcanas rather than one at a time, since they complement each other and, same event and all that stuff. But unless we get Skywrath's Arcana in the next 2 rolls, we'll have to do without that. Anyways, the first thing I have to say about this is, why isn't the second style the default? Throughout the whole Crownfall event, this is the Venge we see. The Venge that holds the power of a goddess. The Venge that's struggling to win back her rightful sovereignty. But instead we get Venge at the end of her journey, all golden and regal and royal. She is bright and radiant, and it makes me wonder why Valve even bothered telling the story if they're just going to essentially tell us that, yeah, she completes her quest, she becomes the queen. Look, it's right there for $35. What's even the point of telling us the story if we already know the end? But, with that aside, all 3 styles are very nice. The color choice is competent, but unlike other arcanas like Spectre or Faceless Void, it lacks a wow factor. This feels like something a default hero design would be. Look at the amount of detail on Spectre's Arcana or Drow Rangers. This feels like a hero's default skin. Most of the Dota default skins are lacking a lot of immense detail to open up potential for future skins. It really feels like they brought that philosophy to the Venge Arcana, and it hasn't worked all that well for her. You can argue that the wings really carried this design, but it's not enough. 6 out of 10. I mean, do I really have to say anything? 10 out of 10. And we're not even done with a whole last quarter of it yet. Just looking at each and every spell and each and every style, you can tell Valve put immense effort into these. Each effect, from items to abilities, is just gorgeous. They make amazing use of the color schemes, and each one has detail just spilling over the brim, from the wave of terror particle effects to the swap shield and that little impact effect on Magic Missile. It's all flawless. 10 out of 10. Except in the Queen Imperia style, her soul strikes, they use Venge's model in the attacks. Continuity much? Well, seeing as how we don't have access to the majority of Queen Imperia's voice lines, I can't really give this a fair and balanced ranking. Don't get me wrong, I'll give it a ranking, but it may change when the Queen Imperia voice lines are actually available. With that out of the way, I really still feel like there's a lot of context missing, and I feel like there's just a few spoilers hidden away. She has voice lines talking bad about Skriok of all characters, implying that at the end of Crownfall or during the 4th act, there's some conflict between her and the goddess.
Skriok's magic has poisoned your mind. I have my kingdom. I have these powers. And I know Skriok's weakness. Skywrath will prosper under my reign. You learn the hard way about Skriok. By some call her the goddess of tricksters or lies.
And there's a few voice lines outright declaring she wins the throne, completely spoiling the end of Crownfall.
Let's get this over with. I've got a kingdom to run. Back to the business of rule.
Valve could have suppressed these voice lines until the end of Crownfall, or taken a page out of Riot's book and just give her new voice lines when the event ends. It's an issue I'll dive into later when I make an actual video about the whole of Crownfall itself. Yeah, outside of spoilers, Tara Strong delivers an amazing performance, encapsulating Venge's confident, driven personality that we see throughout the event. 8 out of 10. The animations need some work on this one. The amount of clipping all over this Arcana is baffling. This bit of clothing clips through her leg, and her wings constantly clip through her hair. You can notice this heavily from up above, and it ruins a lot of immersion, for me at least. Outside of that, these animations are really good. I appreciate how the Queen Imperia style has different poses from the other two. All 3 spells have really impactful animations, especially the swap. She does this little wind back before dashing right into the swap before jumping up, holding her weapon triumphantly. It's got inertia, force. Very nice to use. I think the teleport animation is cute, but the channeling animation isn't too special, I think. It all fits her character really well, and besides the clipping, I really don't have any complaints. 9 out of 10. Overall, one of the newest Arcanas in the game gets an 8.5 out of 10 from me. This visual design is kinda lacking, and I really wish there weren't spoilers riddled across this Arcana, but the other aspects really make this one worth a discounted purchase. Man, I really hope I can talk about the Skywrath Arcana in this episode, but we'll see what the wheel has to say about that. Ogre Magi. Well, not exactly the mage I was looking for, but we'll see what happens in the fourth roll. Anyways, Ogre. I think this Arcana has slight tone issues. There's a distinct lack of visual consistency between Ogre Magi himself and the griffin he's riding. The griffin looks cartoonish and goofy. Its googly eyes bulge out of its skull, its head is emphasized and purposely disproportional, but then you have Ogre sitting on top of it with these horns protruding from his heads with immense model detailing. And then you have the glowing, intimidating eyes with the skull face paint on his red head. It looks demonic, which poorly meshes with the Looney Tunes character they're bounding along on. Don't get me wrong, this Arcana's visual design has comedy to it, but it really doesn't apply that comedy to the actual character. The second style of the Arcana kind of alleviates the demonic look, but it's nothing substantial, and I personally prefer the first style in terms of colors. Outside of that, I really like the red half. The texture of the skin and these bumps look really nice. 7 out of 10. The lore leaves a lot of questions unanswered, and not in a good way like what you see in Spectre's Arcana or Abaddon's base lore. All we get out of this lore is that the Goddess of Luck tasked Ogre Magi with protecting a flock of firelarks. It doesn't explain why they look like this or even acknowledge their transformation at all. They just turn red and yellow and grow horns and start glowing for seemingly no reason. 3 out of 10. For a mage, the spell effects aren't all that flashy outside of Ignite. Fire Blast just brushes up some particle effects and adds some feathers, and Bloodlust is just so disappointing. It's really hard to tell the difference from default. And while multicast looks decent, it still goes back to this weird demonic theme present in the Arcana's visual design. The Aghanim's abilities are even more disappointing. I wish the unrefined Fire Blast changed the color, but this extra splash of fire is somewhat welcome. Fire Shield has no custom spell effects, which baffles me considering that this Arcana has voice lines referencing future heroes as far as Ringmaster.
You need brains to be brainwashed!
Yeah! Hey!
But Valve didn't make a shard effect for an update that would release a year later. Oh, and the Midas effect is fine. It looks better than some of the spells do. 5 out of 10. And speaking of voice lines, you could not get a better set of voice lines for Ogre Magi. Whatever they paid Nolan North, it wasn't enough. This guy's got 27 minutes of dialogue, and while it's not all gut-busting laughter, there are some zingers sprinkled in this charming, humorous voiceover.
Gave him a purple nurple!
What's that?
Like this!
Oh!
2 heads are better than none!
Well, he had a head. Did you hear what they say about her?
Hish! Some people! Bear pun!
I get it.
I love these lines. Such a perfect voiceover for Ogre Magi. 10 out of 10. I love watching Ogre just walk around on this poor little griffin. I know walk cycles aren't exactly the highlight of animation, but you can't deny it's entertaining. I will say that the frequency of these eggs that the mount lays is a tad annoying. It breaks up the funny guy doing the funny thing. As for spells, the Fire Blast animation is really entertaining. Some real Looney Tunes chicanery going on, and it's quite enjoyable. The other spell animations are serviceable, but nothing to really write home about. It's a bit disappointing that the teleport and the channeling animations are the same, and those animations aren't exactly all that good. 6 out of 10. Overall, this gets a 6 out of 10 from me. Could use some better tonal consistency all around, and while I wasn't exactly expecting Shakespeare for the lore, the fact that it couldn't even explain why Ogre looks the way he does is baffling, considering every other Arcana lore is able to do this. Alright, with Trevor, Venge, and Ogre out of the way, let's get on to our final roll. Please let it be Skywrath. Rubik. Again, the wrong mage. Finally, they put his dogs away. 10 out of 10. Alright, for real, I want to start this segment by saying that it was a mistake to make this hero float. Having Rubik walk around would have been just fine. Making him float serves no purpose, and is actually a detriment to this character's animation, but more on that later. Regarding the cape, I think this nice shade of blue works well for Rubik, and I love the fact that it changes color once you've stolen a spell. Not only that, but the color matches with the hero it was stolen from. Even though this is an awesome, really cool feature, it does have a drawback. This is a pay-to-lose feature, letting the enemy know at a glance that you have stolen a spell from a specific hero, whereas with normal Rubik you need to click on him to see what he's got. The cape itself splits into 2 sections, which is a very common design element in both old and new Arcanas. Even though I don't really appreciate this trend in Arcana design, I think it works great for Rubik here. He's all about whimsical, weird, wizardy stuff, and that's exactly what this cape is. Other than that, I really like the asymmetry of the collar. I'm glad to see they kept that design element in the Arcana. Despite its flaws, the color change mechanic easily bumps this up to a 10 out of 10. The lore of this Arcana doesn't make much sense to me. It's a continuation of his immortal staff item where he's trying to solve the puzzle of Perplex. When he eventually does, we never find out how, he grasps the means to change the foundations of magic as a whole. His lore states that he's no longer limited by mimicry, and is looking to remake the world of magic in his own image. Now the problem with that is that it falls short next to the lore he already has. Rubik's base lore is so good, easily in the top 10. I'll make a video about that eventually. And this is just unsubstantial. It doesn't progress or change Rubik as a character, he's still the curious little wizard he always was. Not to mention this character, for all intents and purposes, is still limited to mimicry. And the mimicry was never a limitation, it was an avenue for Rubik, setting him uniquely apart from other mages. And it's something I don't think Rubik himself would be so quick to abandon. After all, this talent of mimicry earned him the title of Grand Magus. Why would he throw it all away just to become another usual wizard who memorizes spells day in and day out? 2 out of 10. The fact that the progression system unlocks spell effects as you get wins is so darn sick. It's way better than just getting a recolor in my opinion, and I wish Valve would make more unique progression systems for other Arcanas like this. Outside of the progression system though, this Arcana only affects spell steal. And while you can say, oh, but Wilson, there's 2 immortals that match the Arcana, this show is called Arcana Review, not Immortal Review. If Valve wants to make me buy other items to complete the Arcana set, that's gonna dock some points, no doubt. 8 out of 10. Tragically, Rubik's voice actor Barry Dennen passed away in 2017, and to honor his memory, Valve chose to use Rubik's default lines with a removed filter, letting us enjoy this man's unedited, whimsical voiceover.
What wonders will I see this day? Oh, I hope no one saw that. How does this one work?
I have nothing but respect for Valve for making this move, and I'm glad they honored such an amazing voice actor this way. 10 out of 10. This Arcana still gets updates for animation. With every new spell, they update this Arcana. The amount of effort they've put into this thing, and continue to put into it, is mind-boggling. Every animation fits his character. He still twitches around and all that stuff. My only complaint is the floating. I can't get past it. This quote-unquote walking animation is just so lackluster. But still, a 9 out of 10 from me. To finish us off, the Rubik Arcana sits itself squarely at an 8 out of 10. The lore could really use some brushing up, I think, and the writers could have done so much more with Rubik's character. Alright, halfway through all of the Arcanas. Thanks a ton for watching until the end. Be sure to leave a comment on what you think about these Arcanas. I hope you stick around for the next half. God bless, and until next time.